Okay, and welcome to episode 11.
Yes, indeed.
Wow.
I'm Rob, and this is Nat.
Okay, so we're going to get into tonight's topic really quickly rather than fight us around, and we're going to talk about cancel culture, especially considering this week it's being brought up that the schools now want to cancel the usage of the words mum, dad, boyfriend, girlfriend, among other things, but they're the four ones I want to focus on because whether we like it or not, whether you come from a traditional family of mum and dad, or you come from a family where it's got two dads or two mums, you still technically got a mum and a dad. Like it took them a female and a male to produce you. So you've got the nuclear family and these great new parents that have come on, whether they adopt or whether they use a surrogate or a sperm donor, you've still technically got a mum and a dad. Like,
and
in the definition term.
In addition, their friends do. So even if they don't happen to know their mum or their dad, which may be the case, they have friends that do. These are terms that are in our society, that are in all societies. In fact, I remember reading at one point that the words for mum and dad are simple in every language, so that essentially young children can say them.
Yeah.
It's a common human experience.
Yeah, and I've actually been watching. I've been watching on Netflix. I'll do a little bit of plug here. Kim's Convenience, which I think they use sounds a Greek or Italian where it's like Omar and Opar. So that's what I'm saying. It sounds like. I know it's not that, but well, you're 100% right. It's simple terms that is in all languages.
That's right. This is a common human experience, and here we are. They're trying to erase it, or to put it another way, they're trying to cancel it.
Yes, and so it's apparently supposed to be part of the LGBTQI, and I'm really sorry, I probably got those letters mixed up. Community that wants this cancelled. Now, I've spoken to a couple of friends of mine, one being a gay male and one being a bisexual transgender female. Neither of them have a problem with the terms mum and dad, boyfriend, girlfriend. And I didn't go into what the other problems were at schools, because these are the four words. I feel, as a 50-year-old woman, if I was dating someone, I'd feel a bit funny saying he's my boyfriend, because it does seem a bit juvenile. It does feel like you're back in high school and you're holding pinkies and you're making on your mum's lounge. But it's still boyfriend and girlfriend. It's still husband and wife, or husband and husband, wife and wife. I'm not being discriminatory towards that. And it's still mum and dad. So even if you got two dads, you're still saying dad and dad.
Yep.
If you got two mums, you're still saying mum and mum.
I actually like it when I hear an older couple using boyfriend and girlfriend. I was actually at a Liberal Democrats function a couple of years ago. I'm not involved in that party at all, but happened to be at an event. And they actually helped us out with the March for Men in 2018. But in any case, and there was a gentleman there, and he introduced this lady. They were around our age, and introduced this lady as his girlfriend. And she sort of commented on the term at the time. And I said, I actually thought it's really nice, being young at heart.
It is. I think it's still. I think now if I use it, it's come back around again to. I'm at the age now where it makes me feel youthful.
Yeah.
I think in my mid to late 20s to now, it did feel juvenile. So I always said my partner, but that sounds cold. So it's one of those terminologies that I think comes back around. I think between like 25 to 45, it does seem a little bit juvenile, but you come 50 and it's like, I'm going to grab a hold of any part of my youth I can.
That's exactly. I was just going to say, we're old enough, we're actually trying to embrace any part of the youth we could hold on to. Absolutely.
Yeah. But it's not just, so I specifically reached out to these friends of mine to ask them if they were okay with this terminology. So I think I've covered the spectrum of it: transgender, bisexual, and gay. That they don't have a problem with the terms. One of them even said that they don't speak to their father. They haven't spoken to their father for many, many years, but they still consider that person their father, their dad.
If they saw him, they'd call him dad.
Exactly. And it goes back to many, probably about 5 years ago now, where they wanted to change Father's Day to Special Persons Day. And we've discussed this before, where Woolworths brought out a cake, those mud cakes they have on special for like $5, and it had Happy Father's Day, Happy Father's Day, and there was one that said Happy Special Persons Day. And there was an uproar, and quite rightly so. There should have been an uproar, because when it's Father's Day, we celebrate all fathers, whether it's a father figure, whether it's a stepfather, whether it's a grandfather, or whether it's your dad. We celebrate that male role model in our life that is treated as like their child.
And I actually said that during my speech for the March for Men. I said it may not be the biological father, it could be a grandfather or another man, or whatever the kid.
It does not have to be your biological father. It doesn't have to be the person who produced the sperm to be the father.
Exactly.
And then a couple of years later, there was a preschool that tried to do it for Mother's Day. And there was a massive uproar, because all of a sudden it had something to do with women, and people going, no, 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 no. And we stood up there and said, quite rightly so, no. But where were you a couple of years ago when they tried to do this to Father's Day?
So the one, when it was about Father's Day, which is a few years ago, the academic that sort of led that in Australia has an unusual name, but I think her name was something like Red Ruby Rose. I hope I'm getting that right. But I gather that was not her birth name, but that was the name that she goes by. I believe it's Red Ruby Rose. But
I think I've heard of her. Now, so we've discussed that. I'm curious about it because I'm a mum, you're a dad. Do not take that. That's one title I am proud of. Do not take that away from me.
Several years ago, I actually saw a scan of a form that had been produced by a school. And just recently, actually, I was trying to see if I could get a copy of it, actually. But in the form had sort of the category of person who was, as adult, who was signing the form for the child, approving an extracurricular trip or something like that. And it had mother, and it had a few other things, and it had the final box was other and specify, and this guy had ticked the other box and written father because they hadn't put a box in for father on the form. So I'm going to try to find a copy of that, actually, if we can.
It's just so disgusting. Like, how can you cancel out 50% of this child? Because that's basically what it is. I'm 50% of my mother, I'm 50% of my father. I've done a DNA test. Trust me, that 50% of that DNA would be my mum's side of the family. 50% of that DNA would be my dad's side of the family. That spit into a freaking tube. I nearly vomited at the thought of it. But why are we cancelling all these things out? Like, we do this every week. We discuss things before we go live. There was a list of things that have been cancelled. So one of the things were that they tried to link again to the LGBTQ community was Paul's Golden Gay Time.
So for those who don't know, Paul's Golden Gay Time is a very popular ice cream here in Australia, my personal favourite in Australia when I lived overseas. And I'm not kidding, I used to miss the fact that I couldn't have a Golden Gay Time. So it's about 10 years ago. Paul's is the name of the company, of course. about 10 years ago, I believe Paul's actually surveyed the Australian population about the name and whether it should be changed. There was overwhelming support for the retention of the name. But of course, that was 10 years ago. And
But
now, back.
the LGBTQ community don't have a problem with it because the origin of the name has got nothing to do with being gay, lesbian, bisexual, etc. It's got to do with the old-fashioned term of gay, which is happy and joyful and
the ice cream itself, which is usually just called gay time in Australia. So if you say to someone, maybe a gay time, when you go to the servo, which is a very Australian thing to say, then they'll know what you mean. And it's quite old. I actually don't know how old they are, but it's been around for decades. They were certainly around when I was a kid, and they were not new then.
I came to Australia in 1978, back in the good old days. There was the usual golden gay time that we've got now, and although we've added on other flavours, there was two when I came to Australia. There was also a chocolate one. After a couple of years, because the chocolate one wasn't selling so well, I guess they just stayed with the original.
Yeah, no, it's a classic gay time for me. Thanks.
Yeah, and then it got so with the golden gay time, the word gay time has got to do with an origin of the word gay. Now we're going to move on to coon cheese, which has changed. I'm not going to promote what the new name is now because I'm never going to buy it.
Again, for non-Australians, coon is a brand of cheese here in Australia. It's named after the actual. Some people, I used to think it was named after the person who founded it here. It's actually not. It's named after.
I've got it open here, so I've got Wikipedia open. The company formally stated that the name derived from the American cheesemaker Edward Coon of Philadelphia, who patented a method in the US in 1926 of fast maturation of cheese via high temperature and humidity. So that's where the word coon came from.
And I gather that means that in Australia, when they founded the company, people were familiar with the cooning process, and it was considered to be a valuable thing to associate the cheese with. I mean, most people have forgotten about it now, but that must have been the case when it was originally founded.
Yeah, and I know everybody part of the LGBTQ community use the word gay, so it's not a slang term unless you use it as one. Like, unless you actually are verbally violent about using the words, not 99.99% of the time, it's describing someone's sexual orientation. I understand the word coon as far as the modern history of that goes when it comes to our Indigenous people is a horrible term to call anybody, but the cheese itself had nothing to do with the bad slang term.
I'd also like to add too, I think in Australia, although it is recognised, it's not actually a very common term. So I would suggest that it's not often that it would actually be used as a term in Australia. I think perhaps in other countries, yes, but here I don't think so. There are other terms, obviously, that will be used, but I don't think that one gets much.
No, and I do understand that the use of the word doesn't matter what you wrap this word up in. It is a horrible word to use against our Indigenous community. But the origin of the cheese has got nothing to do with the cheese. And
I'm going to say something now. That's right. It's not going to be the last time I've say it before the video is over. Context is important.
Okay. Now, when I was doing my homework for tonight's episode, I came across a comedian I absolutely love called, he's Fluffy or Enrique, not Iglesias, Enrique, blah, blah, blah. I'm sorry, Enrique. I just know he was Fluffy and he's so funny. But he's doing the voice for Speedy Gonzalez in the upcoming movie Space Jam 2. Speedy Gonzales has been cancelled because it's apparently racist against Mexicans. Now, Enrique, or Fluffy, sorry, it's just Fluffy, is American Mexican. And he's even saying, it's not racist. The Mexicans are saying, it's not racist. We love him. We love Speedy Gonzales. So it's, where is all this cancel culture coming from when the people who it's supposed to be offending aren't offended?
So I think this is something a lot of people are noticing. I'm actually seeing the mainstream media even report on this and essentially admitting that the people who are out there saying this sort of thing aren't actually the people who you would think maybe would be the target of a particular term, and they're essentially speaking for others. They're presuming that to be able to speak for whether it's the gay community or whether it's Mexicans or whatever it happens to be. So
yeah, well, I stumbled across Speedy Gonzales because we not everybody has heard, but they're trying to cancel Pepe Le Pew for because of the sexual harassment towards a skunk and a cat.
He's always chasing the cat and harassing the cat.
Now, look, I know in reality it's like teaching kids that this is okay, but kids still know the difference between a cartoon and reality.
And also, too, in a lot of those cartoons, actually, what they're actually kind of representing that as negative behaviour. I mean, he was not the hero of the story.
No.
And he would often have bad things happen to him in those cartoons because it was pretty obvious that he was harassing the cat and annoying her.
But is this going to go down? We'll stick on this Warner Brothers cartoon characters. So you had Daffy Duck, you had Sylvester, and you had Porky Pig, who all had some type of speech impediment.
Yep.
Are we going to cancel them because people with speech impediments might get offended by it? Like, it just doesn't make sense. That's
right. In fact, you know what? I'm going to call it. We'll see that. I hadn't thought of that one before. Well done, Nat. I think we're going to call it. Within 5 years, we'll see it.
Well, I was thinking of all these cartoons that I've watched as a kid and I loved as a kid. You had Bugs Bunny dressing up as a girl all the time, and are we going to bring back the transgender community and say that's offensive? It's not offensive. Like, kids know the difference.
They'll get there.
But so again, doing what I did, I came across an American comedian. Actually, I'll say a South African comedian, Trevor Noah, who now resides in America, whose mother is Black South African and his father's white Swiss. And in one of his comedy routines, he is talking about his mother saying, I want a man, and the father comes into it and she goes, I found a man and he likes chocolate like all Swiss do. I could have it wrong, but that was basically the joke of it. During the interview, the woman who was, and I mean disgusting part of it, was one of the worst interviews I've ever seen, because she would never let the guy she'd never get Trevor Noah to get a word out without interrupting him. She said, don't you see where that's offensive? Because she was an English interviewer. One of our comedians, Lenny Henry, said that he looks back on one of his jokes, and Lenny Henry's Black. Funnily enough, he was in a movie once where he had to go undercover running away from the mob, and he went whiteface. He disguised himself as a white male. And in one of his comedy routines, he's saying, "Oh, it's getting so hot up here, I'm sweating chocolate." And she couldn't see the difference between Trevor Noah saying the joke about all Swiss love chocolate, and Lenny Henry's comment of sweating chocolate. Like, one's a joke on the Swiss loving chocolate, and one's a joke on the black person sweating chocolate. Trevor Noah quite smartly said, "I see everybody as chocolate. My mother's dark chocolate, and milk chocolate, and my dad's white chocolate."
Nice.
So he twisted it around on her, but she still kept on interrupting her. Now, because of this narrative of them trying to say that his comedy routine, when he's actually, as a South African himself, he's using himself and his heritage as the butt of the joke, made me think of another comedian called Joe Coy, whose father is a white American, and he was in the military, and his mother's Filipino. Now, I've seen all these guys. Joe Coy is one of my favorites. I laugh so hard I actually snort when I watch him, because I sound like Muttley the dog. I can't catch a breath. He's that funny. But he mimics his mum in that Filipino accent. Most of his shows. Yeah. I'll go back to Fluffy, whose most famous stand-up comedy routine is reciting the racist basket, who's now Fluffy, as I said, is Mexican American. One of his friends is Black American, and I'm going to cut a very long story short, but it's bloody funny. He was going to play at the same city as this black comedian who he's friends with. So he decided to get a whole black racist picnic basket together. So he was getting watermelon and fried chicken, but he went into the supermarket and told them what he was doing. And people in the black people in the supermarket are going, "Oh, you got to chuck orange Fanta in," and all these stereotypical Black American things in the basket, and then took it to the hotel and asked the concierge to take the basket up. But the concierge was black. And she's going, "I'm not taking that thing up." Like, she was furious, but not knowing the joke.
Yeah.
Now, I cannot remember. There was something to do with on the card, had something to do with the Ku Klux Klan. So they took the basket up and they knocked on the door, and they said, "There's a gift basket here for you, sir." And he opened it up, and he's going, and he's opening up and, "Oh, food," but read the card, and it was, this whatever had to do with the Ku Klux Klan. And all apparently you heard was him swearing from behind this hotel room, and then Fluffy had knocked on the door with Fluffy's manager, Fluffy's stage presence. And this black comedian opened the door and just saw him and knew exactly what it was. But the first thing that the black comedian said was, "I'm really, when I first got it, I was like, oh, good lunch." Like, he didn't even see the racist connotation in the basket. But this is what I mean. If Joe Coy and Fluffy and Trevor Noah all use themselves as the butt of the joke as far as their race is concerned, and they're most famous in their cultures, who's hurting? It's not. Why should I be offended?
Yeah, that's what Mel Brooks was doing actually decades ago. I guess it's been a mainstay of comedy. But Mel Brooks, for example, would really play off various aspects of Jewish culture. And if you look at the History of the World Part One, for example,
Yeah,
the History of the World Part One actually ends with a segment called Jews in Space.
yeah.
So the thing is, though, Mel Brooks has actually said that a lot of stuff couldn't be made now
It
because of
couldn't,
cancel
like,
culture.
Blazing Saddles, History of the World Part One. It's good to be the
That's right.
king. You know,
That's right.
it's like, why are you cancelling these things? Who's cancelling these things? Who's calling for these to be cancelled? As much as I still think cancelling Coon Cheese wasn't right, a tiny part of me does understand it. Everything else, it's like, why are you cancelling these? Who's cancelling these things? Like,
Going forward, that's going to be called cheer cheese, by the way. And it seems like a significant proportion of the Australian population are a bit upset with what's actually happening.
We're not going to use it. It's like if they change the name of Vegemite because vegetables might get offended.
Exactly.
Or why does it have to be black? Or
so, who's doing it? I mean, we know it's a small group of people. They're very vocal. They go by various names. I would generally call them SJWs. I view social justice warriors, feminists, and a few other groups on a continuum. They don't all agree with each other, but they do. But there is a fairly significant overlap. Although I have to say, within feminism now, of course, is somewhat split between second and third wave. But the third wave, some people say, is a fourth wave, but third, fourth wave now, they're pretty much very much embedded in cancel culture. Whereas the second wave feminists, people like Germaine Greer, are very much opposing that now. So, which is really interesting. Really, their movement that really spawned it.
yeah, like it just for me. And I know I've talked a lot tonight, but as I had to get all those people out and all the things that are being cancelled out or are going to be future cancelled out, is even the people back in the 70s, 80s, part of the 90s, who were the social justice warriors, they're now sitting back going, what the fuck are you doing?
To a certain extent, it's like, I think it's like Frankenstein's monster. They've basically let it out and they've lost control of it.
Yeah, but everybody's getting offended now. They talk about, you know, this new woke culture. I hate the freaking word. I think it's moronic. But we're all part of minority. We're all some part of a minority. If we were to go to Dubai, for example, if we were to go to India, if we were to go to China, we would be the minority. I've got naturally blonde hair. Trust me, this is artificial intelligence. Blonde joke. We're never going to be able to tell blonde jokes. Irish jokes, we're never going to be able to tell them again. And I found out recently I've got 54% Irish in me. So I'm going to be offended, you know, when that was the spitting in the tube thing. I'm going to be offended when you tell a blonde joke. I'm going to be offended when you tell an Irish joke. I'm going to be offended when you tell an old joke. I'm going to be offended when you tell a menopause joke. I'm going to be offended when you tell an Irish joke. There's my minorities. You know, I'm going to be offended when you tell a fat joke, or, you know, she wears glasses joke, or, you know, there's so many. We're all part of some type of minority. So
yes.
We're all part of the woke culture. So stop using social justice warriors. Stop using the term that you're all woke, because we are all woke because we're all trying to fight our minorities.
So I once heard an interesting argument about identity politics, which is a concept related to social justice. So identity politics is the process of basically dividing people by coarse physical characteristics, whether it be gender or whatever it happens to be, and they're making stipulations about what they can and can't do. Of course, identity politics claims to be very inclusive, but in actual fact, it's inherently exclusive. But I heard a really interesting argument once that suggested that identity politics will keep breaking down over time and eventually devolve into individualism, because ultimately the individual is the smallest unit, essentially, of identity. It'd be interesting to see if that actually does occur. Now, it may take a long time to get there, but perhaps that's the end game for identity politics. Perhaps it'll just essentially burn itself out and end up as some form of essentially individualism. I hope so, actually, because identity politics is actually quite dangerous.
Yeah, well, I think the social justice warriors are trying to create a utopia, but there's no such thing, because even as much as you and I agree on 99% of things, we still have a different version of our utopia. So,
and you know what? It's okay
what are you
to disagree.
trying to create?
It's okay to disagree.
Yeah.
And that's one of the things that this, by the way, is a point I've always maintained. I remember arguing with people when I was a teenager about why it's okay to disagree with people, and it's not okay to get angry with someone just because they've got a different opinion. I once pointed out that to an older man who seemed surprised when I said that I said, if you really get angry at someone every time you discover they've got a different opinion, you're going to spend your entire life being angry, because there are always going to be people with different opinions.
Exactly. Now, whilst you were talking, Stupid Me just looked up the comedian Fluffy. It's Gabriel Iglesias.
Okay, I have actually heard of Gabriel Iglesias.
Yeah.
So we were aiming to go for about half an hour tonight. I'm going to make a suggestion. There are a few other points I wanted to make. Why don't we have Cancel Culture Part 2 next week?
Yeah.
Sounds
good? Because I do think, and I think this is a double-parter, and we don't want to go too long. So, yeah, we'll do Part 2 next week.
Sounds good. A few extra points I want, and I don't want to have to rush through them. I think because there's different aspects. We've talked about one aspect tonight. We can talk about other aspects tomorrow night. That's how big cancel culture is. Yep.
So, Cancel Culture Part 2 next Wednesday night.
Next Wednesday. All right.
Okay.
Thank you, Nat.
Have a good night, everybody.
Bye-bye.
Bye.